Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 17, Text number 9. Ma saurabheyatra shuchaha Vyetu te vrishalad bhayam Marodhiramba bhadram te Khalana mayi shastari. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation. O son of Surabhi, you need lament no longer now. There is no need to fear this low-class Shudra. And O mother cow, as long as I am living as the ruler and subduer of all envious men, there is no cause for you to cry. Everything will be good for you. Translation with repetition. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Protection of bulls and cows and all other animals can be possible only when there is a state ruled by an executive head like Maharaja Parikshit. Maharaja Parikshit addresses the cow as mother, for he is a cultured, twice-born Kshatriya king. Surabhi is the name of the cows which exist in the spiritual planets and are especially reared by Lord Krishna himself. As men are made after the form and features of the Supreme Lord, so also the cows are made after the form and features of the Surabhi cow in the spiritual kingdom. In the material world, the society gives all protection to human being, but there is no law to protect the descendants of Surabhi, who can give all protection to men by supplying the miracle food, milk. But Maharaj Parikshit and the Pandavas were fully conscious of the importance of the cow and bull, and they were prepared to punish the cow killer with all chastisement, including death. There has sometimes been agitation for the protection of cow, but for want of pious executive heads and suitable laws, the cow and bull are not given protection. The human society should recognize the importance of the cow and the bull and thus give all protection to these important animals, following in the footsteps of Maharaj Parikshit. For protecting the cows and Brahminical culture, the Lord, who is very kind to the cow and the Brahmanas, Go Brahmana Hitaya, will be pleased with us and will bestow upon us real peace. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport. Ma saurabheyatra shuchaha Vyetu te vrishalad bhayam Ma rodhir amba badram te Kalanam mayi shastari. This is a statement that is told by Maharaj Parikshit to the cow and the bull. He is saying, O son of Surabhi, Saurabheya, you need lament no longer now. Ma Shuchaha. In fact, this word Ma Shuchaha is also used in the Bhagavad Gita, in the famous verse, Sarva Dharman Parityajya Mam Ekam Sharanam Vraja Aham Tvam Sarva Papebhyo Mokshayishyami Ma Shuchaha. Shuchaha means to not worry or to be free from lamentation. There is no need to fear. Vetu te vrishalad bhayam. There is no need to fear this low-class Shudra. Shudra here is translated by Prabhupada. The word is Vrishalad. Vrishalad means Shudra. O mother cow, Maharaj Parikshit is addressing the cow as mother. Amba. O mother cow, as long as I am living as the ruler, Mayi Shastari. Shastari means a ruler and a subduer. In fact, this word Shastari is derived from the root word, the Shas Dhatu, The Shas Dhatu in Sanskrit. Sanskrit is, every word in Sanskrit has a root word. Here the word Shastari has a root word called Shas. And Prabhupada says that Shas Dhatu pertains to controlling or ruling. A government's ruling through force or weapons is called Shastra. Thus, whenever there is ruling, either by weapons or by injunctions, the Shas Dhatu is the basic principle. Therefore, we can see the words Shastra, which means Vedic scriptures, Shastra, which means weapons, through which, kings rule. It's called Shastra. But Prabhupada says the better way of getting ruled is by Shastra and not by Shastra. Our Vedic scriptures are not ordinary law books of human common sense. They are the statements of factually liberated persons unaffected by the imperfectness of the senses. So that is the meaning of the word Shastari, means ruler or subduer. O mother cow, as long as I am living as the ruler and subduer of all envious men here is Kalanam, there is no cause for you to cry, Ma Rodihi. Everything will be good for you. Badram te. Abhadram means inauspiciousness or something which is not good. Badram means good. So, here Maharaj Parikshit is giving assurance to the cow and the bull. Maharaj Parikshit was appointed as the king of Hastinapura after the Pandavas. He was appointed as the king of Hastinapura by Maharaj Yudhishthir. Maharaj Parikshit wanted to establish his ruling in every nook and corner of the world, and therefore he was traveling to every nook and corner of the world and conquering different kingdoms. And while he was coming across on the banks of river Saraswati, there he could see a cow and a bull in a very terrified situation. The bull was terrified. Why was it terrified? Because a Shudra who was dressed like a king was beating him. And he was so afraid that he was standing on one leg and he was trembling in fear. And the cow, she was rendered poor and calfless. Her legs were being beaten by the Shudra king. There were tears in her eyes, and she was distressed and weak. She was hankering after some grass in the field. So the Kali personified, who was dressed like a king, was beating the bull and the cow. And this has never happened ever in the history before Maharaj Parikshit. So Maharaj Parikshit was astonished to see the plight of the cow and the bulls, which were so carefully protected in the Varnashama Dharma, the Sanatana Dharma. And he immediately took the action of punishing this Shudra king. And Prabhupada writes in the purport that the protection of the bulls and the cows and all the other animals can be possible only when there is a state ruled by an executive head like Maharaj Parikshit. And Maharaj Parikshit addresses the cow as mother, for he is a cultured, twice born Kshatriya king. So the kingdom of yore were very conscious about the principles of religion. Their goal was to ensure that the principles of religion is implemented and followed by every citizen. According to the Vedic literature, a citizen is called Praja. And Praja not only refers to the human society, but it also refers to the animal society as well. So it was the king's responsibility and the duty to protect not only the human beings, but also the animals of the society. So the animals of the society were also called as Praja. These principles are very much prevalent in the material atmosphere that we all live in. Actually, if you see any Indian philosophy, the Indian philosophy deals with the experiencer, the one who is experiencing this material world. And science, on the other hand, deals with the experienced. Like, for example, if I am seeing a tree, the tree is the experienced. There are certain laws governing the experienced world. The study of that law of the experienced world is what constitutes science. But unfortunately, the subject matter of the experiencer is not studied, and it is something which the science denies. And this subject matter, especially the Bhagavad Gita, deals with the study of the experiencer, the subject. And what is the purpose of the experiencer experiencing all these things in the material world is a study of the Vedic literatures. Therefore, the first knowledge that Krishna imparts to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, what does he say? Dehi nosmin yata dehe kaumaram yavvanam jara tata dehantara praptir dhiras tatra muhyati. When Arjuna was bewildered in the battlefield of Kurukshetra, he was perplexed as to whether he has to fight in the battlefield or to leave the battlefield. He was very confused. And the first knowledge that Krishna imparts to him is about the experiencer, which is the soul. And he says that the nature of the soul is eternal, Sanatana. And the dharma of that eternal soul, the experiencer, is the subject matter of study in all the Vedic literatures. And the kings of those time were very, very, conscious about the principles governing this experiencer. And they were ensuring that the experiencer, the spirit soul, who has a particular relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the process of reviving that relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the goal of Sanatana Dharma. And that particular goal is what is to be met by a Sanatanist. Prabhupada in the previous purport used the word Sanatanist to describe the person who follows the Sanatana Dharma. And the goal of a Sanatana Dharma is to help the living entities get its real Swarupa or its constitutional nature. The process of developing that relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead is called Sanatana Dharma. And the king's primary duty was to ensure that all the prajas in his kingdom were moving towards that ultimate goal and that ultimate purpose. And that is what Maharaja Parikshit is ensuring in his kingdom. The bull here represents dharma, the principles of religion. There are 4 principles. One is the duration of life. Second one, the power of retention. That is our capacity to remember things. Third one is mercy. And fourth one is moral principles. And here it is described that the bull is standing on one leg. What does this mean? That means bull is ideally supposed to have 4 legs. It's a 4-legged animal. But it has only 1 leg, which means 3/4 of the people in Kali Yuga are not following the religious principles, or they're unaware of the religious principles. Therefore, the bull standing on 1 leg represents this. So there is a complete decline of dharma, and the beginning of decline of dharma can be seen here, that the cows and the bulls are being beaten. The cow and the bull was being beaten by this Shudra who was dressed like a king. The cow, on the other hand, is like the mother, and she has a very, very important role to play in the society, both the cows and the bulls. And Prabhupada talks about this in the previous purport. Prabhupada says that the bull is the emblem of the moral principle, and the cow is the representative of the earth. When the bulls and the cows are in a joyful mood, it is to be understood that the people of the world are also in a joyful mood. The reason is that the bull helps production of grains in the agricultural field, and the cow delivers milk, the miracle of aggregate food. The human society, therefore, maintains these two important animals very carefully so that they can wander everywhere in cheerfulness. But at the present moment, in this age of Kali, both the cow and the bulls are now being slaughtered and eaten up as foodstuff by a class of men who do not know the Brahminical culture. And because of this, the whole society is facing a lot of problems. So, I have an interesting statistics about this to share with all of you about what happens when the world, takes a lot of meat by opening slaughterhouses. We all know that the world is made up of 71% of water and 21% is land. Out of this 20 odd percent of land, 10% of land is agricultural land. This very much corroborates to what Prabhupada says. Prabhupada says about vacant land. Prabhupada says that there are sufficient resources to feed the entire population. There is no dearth of resources. In fact, overpopulation is a myth, is what Prabhupada says. So, we will try to understand using statistics as to how this statement is very true. So, 10% of land is what is agricultural land. Out of this 10% of land, 8% of land is used as livestock, meant to feed the cattle and all the other livestocks, which is meant for going as meat. Only 8%. Only 2.4% of the land is farming land, and that's what is feeding the whole world today. 2.4%. And India is said to be the country with highest number of people following a vegetarian kind of a diet. They're the highest. India is the highest. And it is said that 18% of the world population is in India. It's a very interesting data. And India has only 2% of the world's lands. And it has 30% of the world's cattle. So it is said that we being in India, we can actually cater to the need of all the Indians' requirement for food with very minimum amount of land. So 2.4%, as I said, is basically the crop farming that is required to feed the entire world. And it is said that the Western world, which is basically a meat-based, countries when they basically consume meat-based diet, if the whole world shifts to a meat-based diet, then we will need 140% of the agricultural land that is required now. That means 40% more is required. But on the other hand, if the whole world adopts the Indian diet, the vegetarian diet, we require only 40% of the agricultural land that is existing now. So, there is actually no dearth of resources. So, anyway, I have some more statistics which I would like to share at a different point of time. But the point I am trying to share here is that there is, Prabhupada, says that there are so many vacant lands and we can definitely, produce a lot of crops to feed the whole world 10 times, more, even the population is 10 times more than what it is today, we can still feed the whole world, is what Prabhupada says. And this is corroborated in this particular statistics, and this is there, you can all check. It's on ourworlddata.com. That's the website which has all this data. And all Harvard University, Stanford University, they all, collaborate, and they come up with this particular data and put it up in this website. So this is a very interesting data as to how there's no shortage of resources in this material world. And Prabhupada says that the world is designed by the Lord in such a way that there is no dearth of any kind of resources. So the point is that the Sanatana Dharma principles, which Maharaja Parikshit is actually trying to establish in his kingdom, is a principle that is very, very important for all living entity to attain perfection in life. And Maharaja Parikshit addresses the cow as mother, for he is a cultured, twice born Kshatriya king. So Maharaja Parikshit addresses the cow as mother because cow gives us milk, and cow is our mother. And in fact, in our Sanatana Dharma, the cow is worshipped. And further, Prabhupada goes on to say, as men are made after the form and features of the Supreme Lord, so also the cows are made after the form and features of the Surabhi cows in the spiritual kingdom. In the material world, the human society gives all protection to the human being, but there is no law to protect the descendants of Surabhi, who can give all protection to men by supplying the miracle food milk. But Maharaj Parikshit and Pandavas were fully conscious of the importance of cow and bull, and they were prepared to punish the cow killer with all chastisement, including death. There has sometimes been agitation for the protection of the cow, but for want of pious executive heads and suitable laws, the cow and the bull are not given protection. So here, Prabhupada is saying that whatever is there in the material world is actually there in the spiritual world as well. As Lord Krishna talks about this in the Bhagavad Gita, Urdhva Moolam Adashakam Ashwattam Prahuravyayam Chandamsi Yasya Parnani Estam Vedasa Vedavit. Krishna talks about a banyan tree. There is a banyan tree which has its roots upwards and its branches down, and whose leaves are the Vedic hymns. One who knows this tree is the knower of the Vedas, is what Krishna says. So Krishna here, the banyan tree, which is there on the bank of a river, has its reflection, correct? And the reflection is the representation of the material world. And the tree itself is the spiritual world. And because there is, Prabhupada describes that because there is the tree, the original tree, there is the reflection of the tree. If the tree was not there, the reflection also will not be there. Isn't it? So whatever we experience in the material world is actually a reflection of what is there in the spiritual world. So all the experiences that the living entity undergoes in this material world is actually an experience which is actually originally there in the spiritual world, and therefore it is there in the material world. Therefore the cows in the material world are a reflection of what is there in the spiritual world, the Surabhi cows in the spiritual world. And that is what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. And Prabhupada uses the word culture here. Maharaj Parikshit, because of Brahmanical culture, he could see the importance of cow and the bull. So Maharaj Parikshit was very conscious about the principles of religion which govern the living entity every moment. And Krishna talks about the importance of recognizing these principles which are governing our lives. And the moment we align ourselves with those religious principles, the moment we abide by the religious principles, we can lead a happy life in this world, is what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Utkramantam sthitam vapi bunjanam va gunanvitam vimudha nanu pashyanti jnana chakshushaha. He says that it is the duty of every householder who is a Sanatanist to have, this is not the translation. So Krishna says that one should have jnana chakshushaha, or one should be trained in knowledge. Knowledge of what? Of the eternal principles of religion, the Sanatana Dharma. So until and unless one is trained in the eternal principles of Sanatana Dharma, one cannot lead a happy and a very prosperous life. So these principles are very much prevalent in this material world, and the living entity who learns to recognize and follow and live according to these principles can lead a very, very happy life, is what Krishna talks about in the Bhagavad Gita. He says, Pashyanti jnana chakshushaha. One's eyes should be trained to see all these principles in existence. And these principles cannot be seen, grossly, but one has to hear about these principles and learn to see by hearing from the Shastras. That is how we have to see these principles. For example, laws of karma is functioning in this material world. Correct? Beginning from the idea that I'm not this body, I'm spirit, soul. I'm part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I have a duty towards the Supreme Personality of Godhead. My constitutional duty is to render service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. These principles have to be recognized by the living entity. And the moment these principles are recognized, and we have to learn to live according to these principles. The moment we start living according to these principles, then we can actually spiritually advance in this material world. So these are the points that, these are a few points which Maharaja Parikshit is sharing. Prabhupada is sharing in the purport. There has sometimes been agitation for the protection of the cow, but for want of pious executive heads and suitable laws, the cow and the bulls are not given protection. The human society should recognize the importance of the cow and the bull, and thus give all protection to these important animals, following in the footsteps of Maharaja Parikshit. For protecting the cows and the Brahmanical culture, the Lord, who is very kind to the cow and the Brahmanas, Go Brahmana Hitayacha, will be pleased with us and will bestow upon us real peace. So, the primary goal of the Sanatana Dharma is to move the living entity towards spiritual advancement, and one of the most important principles to help the society function smoothly is the Varnashama system. The Varnashama system basically divides the entire society into 4 social divisions and 4 spiritual divisions. The 4 social divisions are Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya and the Shudra. The Brahmana's duty is Patan, Patan, Yajan, Yajan. Patan, Patan means educating the society about the importance of spiritual life, of practicing spiritual life. That is the duty of a Brahmana. The Kshatriya is to ensure that all the citizens are protected, the Prajas are protected, and the Kshatriyas take advice from the Brahmanas for all the administrative affairs. So, Brahmana, Kshatriya, and then the Vaishyas. The Vaishya's duty is mentioned by Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita as Krishi Goraksha Vanijyam. Krishi means to take care of the land, agricultural land. Goraksha means protection of the cows. And then Shudras help the other 3 classes in performing their duties. This is basically a very simple social structure, and this kind of a social structure will satisfy the need of the human being, because a human being basically subsists on food grains, and a living entity and a human being can be happy with food, good shelter and good relationship, is what Prabhupada says. So with these 3 things, a human being can lead a very happy and a very, very simple life. And this system also ensures that there is peace, upkeep of peace in society. And there are 4 spiritual orders. The 4 spiritual orders are brahmacharis are basically trained till about 25 years in the principles of brahmacharya in the Gurukula, and then after that the brahmachari is allowed to take up the grihastha ashram. Correct? Grihe tishtati iti grihastha. One who is living in a house with wife and children is called as a grihastha. That is till 50 years of age, and after 50 years of age, then there is the vanaprastha, where the husband and the wife leave home and go on a pilgrimage for seeking guidance from spiritual masters who's to stay in such pilgrimage sites and look for spiritual advancement. That is the vanaprastha. And finally, the husband leaves home, the wife under the care of the elder sons. He leaves the wife under the care of the elder sons, and he leaves home and goes out to basically to the forests to practice very serious spiritual life. This was the tradition, and this was the society's model, which was very much prevalent in India. And this culture is called as Varnashama system. And Prabhupada says that human society begins with Varnashama Dharma. Human society does not begin if Varnashama Dharma is not prevalent. But then how do we understand this in our context? We don't live in a Varnashama society, then how do we make spiritual advancement? So that is why Chaitanya Mahaprabhu talks about a very, very important principle. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, in his conversation with Ramananda Raya, he asks Ramananda Raya, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the Lord himself, he's asking Ramananda Raya. So Ramananda Raya Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asks Ramananda Raya, what is the highest religious principle? So in reply, Ramananda Raya says, Varnashama Dharma. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu rejects this by saying that Varnashama Dharma is not possible to be followed in Kali Yuga. And Varnashama Dharma is, has an impersonal conception of God, is what Prabhupada writes in the purport. It does not present the Supreme Personality of Godhead as a person with all his energies. It does not present like that. There is some kind of an impersonal conception of God. So therefore, Varnashama Dharma was rejected by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Then Ramananda Raya proposes that one should learn to work without fruitive results. Can that be the highest religion? And that is the highest religion. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says that this can also not be followed by people in Kali Yuga. It's external. And then finally Ramananda Raya says that, what does he say? He says that Shrutigatam Tanuvan Manobi, Sthane Sthita Shrutigatam Tanuvan Manobi. In whatever position you are there, you please exist in that position. You may be an engineer, you may be a doctor, you may be in different occupations, but the fundamental principle is that Shrutigatam Tanuvan Manobi. Hear about the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead from bona fide acharyas, from pure devotees. And simply by hearing from pure devotees of the Lord, one can advance in Krishna consciousness. And this hearing is the most important principle in the Krishna conscious practice. And this was something that is explained by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself. In fact, when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was traveling in the present Andhra Pradesh, there was a Brahmana called the Kurma Brahmana. Kurma Brahmana was very moved by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings, the Harinama Sankirtana movement, and he wanted to leave his house and come with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. In fact, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu chastised him, saying that you stay in your house, do your household duties, and make sure that you hear from pure devotees of the Lord. Therefore, Shrutigatam Tanuvan Manobi, it is said we have to hear from the pure devotees of the Lord, and by hearing we can make tremendous advancement. And therefore, Prabhupada has given us these books where Prabhupada speaks through his books. And by associating with Prabhupada in his books, one can make a rapid spiritual advancement. And that's the principle that's most suitable for us to follow in this age of Kali. And this is a very, very important principle about hearing. Krishna also talks about hearing in the Bhagavad Gita in many, many places. In fact, Arjuna heard the Bhagavad Gita and he says, I am experiencing the nectar of the Bhagavad Gita. When Maharaja Parikshit heard the Bhagavatam from Shukadeva Goswami, he said, I have lost my hunger and thirst by hearing the Bhagavatam. When King Kulashekar Alvar, who belonged to the Sri Sampradaya, who's written the famous Mukundamala Stotra, and Prabhupada writes purport to Mukundamala Stotra, he could experience Ramayana as he was hearing from one of the reciters of Ramayana. How can somebody experience the words which are given from the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam? There is a reason for this. The Bhagavatam describes, in the purport, Prabhupada writes, that for any transcendental source of knowledge, there is no difference between the subject and the object. Like, for example, if the name of a person in the material world, let us assume that there is a person with the name Priya. What does Priya mean? Affection or care or love, isn't it? Does this mean that this person has affection to all the people in existence? Not necessarily. That person may not be an embodiment of affection. So, the reference and the referent, Prabhupada says, are different. But when it comes to spiritual subject, which is absolute in nature, the subject matter and the description about that subject matter are one and the same. Therefore, the content of Prabhupada's books, the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam, are not just mere words. They are transcendental experiences. And by submissive oral reception, one can get the experience of Krishna from the Bhagavatam. Therefore, the sages of Naimisharanya, they questioned Suta Goswami as to what will happen to the religious principles after Krishna departed this world. And what is the answer Suta Goswami gave? There is an incarnation of Krishna called the Bhagavatam. But how can Krishna incarnate as Bhagavatam? Bhagavatam are just mere words. So they are not just mere words. They are transcendental sources of experiencing Krishna. It's a very, very important point to understand, because many times it is misconstrued that Bhagavad Gita is just philosophy, Bhagavatam is just philosophy. It's not philosophy alone. It is basically an experience of Krishna one can get from these transcendental sources, because these words and Krishna are non-different. It depends upon the quality, the ability of the receiver to have submissive oral reception, and that's the qualification. And Prabhupada says the submissive oral reception is an art. Just like an art cannot be learnt in 1 or 2 days, the art of submissive oral reception has to be learnt in the association of devotees. Then we can actually experience the Bhagavad Gita. And Prabhupada says, by reading Bhagavad Gita, one can see Krishna face to face. How is it possible? They are just mere words. They are just descriptions of the Supreme Lord. But it is possible because they are transcendental sources. And therefore, it is very, very important to read the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam in this light. That you are in touch with the transcendental source. And one can experience Krishna by submissive oral reception, and that practice is very, very important, of submissive oral reception. Submissive oral reception means, Prabhupada says, without any kind of an interpretation or a speculation. The word submissive is derived from the word submit. You submit yourself to the speaker and then hear in that submissive spirit, not in a challenging spirit. And then one can actually experience Krishna through the pages of the Bhagavatam. And this is the most important principle that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is giving us. And in one of the places, Prabhupada says, to develop this submissive attitude. How do we develop this submissive attitude? It is said, as we spiritually advance, we can become very submissive. Submissive attitude. One can develop the submissive attitude. And how do we spiritually advance in Kali Yuga? It is by chanting the holy names of Krishna. By chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, which is non-different from Krishna. By chanting and associating with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, our heart becomes cleansed. The more our heart becomes cleansed, the more we become submissive. And the more we become submissive, we can begin to experience Krishna in the pages of the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam, which are transcendental sources of knowledge. Therefore, we have to get in touch with these transcendental sources, unadulterated transcendental sources, and try to experience the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Correct? And that is the most important instruction which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is giving. And this is how we can practice Krishna consciousness in our context. In fact, the Varnashama system, which was very much prevalent, has degraded over a period of time into different caste systems. And this is something which is clarified by Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says, Chaturvarnyam Maya Srishtam Guna Karma Vibhagashaha. It is not based upon birth, it is based upon qualities, guna, and based upon the activities of the living entities. Isn't it? That's the Varnashama system that Krishna is actually trying to present. And of course, it is degraded over a period of time. In fact, there is a lot of study that is being carried out on how the different cultures have evolved. Prabhupada, in fact, calls democracy as demons crazy. But why does Prabhupada call this? There is a very deep reason for it. Because whenever Prabhupada makes a statement, it has a very deep meaning. In fact, if you try to understand as to how this democracy originated, it began in the Western world, where there was always a tussle between the government and the church. Why was there a tussle? Because in the Western society, king was actually a representative of God on earth. If king was a representative of God on earth, the churches asked, what are we then? So there was a tussle. So there was a tussle between the church and the state. And then the Protestant movement, resulted out of that. So they said, they broke out and they formed, because they could not accommodate two different ideas. So kings began to rule the Western civilization. They took over. So many countries were formed. France, Italy, all those countries were formed. And when kings forcefully brought people together by their military force, they took away the properties of the citizens without their consent. That's called totalitarianism. If you take the property, the rights of citizens with their consent, that's called democracy. That's the evolution of democracy. What is the purpose of democracy? Actually, there is no purpose. Just get people together and, form a nation. That's how France was formed. That's how Italy was formed. But on the other hand, if you see Varnashama system, there is a beautiful blend of, accommodating material principles, material things which are required for subsistence in the material world, along with spiritual development. Can you see how the king was, functioning under this principle? What is that principle? Spiritual advancement. So anybody, whether he is a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, the fundamental principle of, advancing his spiritual life was never lost. But on the other hand, if you see the evolution and the origin of democracy, it's just, the exercise of power of people. Just for his selfish needs, the entire society was formed. This is how nations are formed. But India was not formed like that. It was formed, the societies are coming together to achieve a particular goal, a particular purpose. And the particular purpose was spiritual advancement. That is why the Prabhupada quotes a verse, Varnashama vata purushena parav puman Vishnu aradhyate. The purpose of Varnashama Dharma is Vishnu Aradhana. And this was the prime goal of all the living entities in the Sanatana Dharma. And here we can see Maharaja Parikshit trying to ensure that the Sanatana Dharma is followed by every citizen. So these are the things that we can actually understand from this particular verse, the importance of cows and the bulls and the protection of cows and bulls in society, and how the king of the Vedic times were ensuring that the Sanatana Dharma principle is being followed by every citizen. And Maharaj Parikshit stands as an example for this, as to how a king should be, how an ideal leader should be, how the society should be conducted, how people of society should cooperatively work for the ultimate purpose of spiritual advancement. All of these things we can learn from this particular descriptions of this particular chapter in the Bhagavatam. So with this we'll stop here. If there are any questions, I can take any questions. Yes.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandot Pranam, Jai Srila Prabhupada. Prabhu, when I was in school, my geography teacher taught that democracy is a government for fools where the heads are counted and not the brains.
Yeah.
So Prabhu, right now we are having Ram temple coming up and we imagine that soon we should get Ram Rajya. So how is it compatible between the existing current situation and what you are proposing in this class, Prabhu?
Yeah. So as far as the existing current situation is concerned, we have to make the best use of the bad bargain. We don't have to change the systems radically. Correct? We make the best use of the bad bargain, and we basically have to learn to live by the principle that is taught by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Sthane sthita shrudigatam tanuvan manobi. So Sankirtan Yajna is actually the principle, that is the savior. That's why Chaitanya Mahaprabhu spread the Sankirtan Yajna. So in every house there must be Sankirtan Yajna. People have to learn to practice this Krishna conscious principle at home. Regular Bhagavatam classes. Prabhupada says, in fact, there is no difference between a house and a temple. A house can be converted into a temple simply by following the principles of Krishna consciousness. Like doing Arati, doing Sankirtan. All of these things can convert a home into a temple. So, I think these are the principles that blend in well, in the current state, than to bring about a radical change and implementing the Varnashama system.
Yes, Prabhu, because now the trust is more on technology rather than on spirituality outside. Yeah. Only when we come to ISKCON and we are getting in touch with a pure devotee like Srila Prabhupada, we get some enlightenment that what is life, what is living. But what about the masses, because they are ignorant of all these facts. So we will all be gliding towards more and more hellish conditions.
No, therefore it's the responsibility of those who are following to preach Krishna consciousness to the world.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Okay, so we'll stop here. Granthar Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada ki.